Hello. Oh. Good morning.
Hi there, Robin.
Hi there, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Yourself, how's things?
All right, a bit of a cold. Got one of those, you know, you get like a thing on your eye. So
Yes.
I've got to get rid of the vanity contacts today. I've got my accountancy look on today.
Have your stern, very serious look on you today.
Hi, Julian. Hi, Kevin.
Julian. Hi, morning.
Hi, Tim.
Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of cold bugs going around at the moment. I was talking to an acquaintance yesterday who's one of their 5 kids had a bit of a sniffle during the week, so that was everybody at home from school, not allowed to go in, all having to get COVID tests, all came back negative.
Morning.
She wasn't too impressed.
Yeah, I went to Austria last week. They just caught me.
Yeah, did you get there?
We arrived Thursday morning, and then a Thursday afternoon they announced that the corridor had been taken away. So we've just been and had tests, and they're all negative. So I don't know if we'll be able to sort it out with the school to let my one join in or not. But we'll see.
It should be all right. I was thinking of you last week because I saw your snippet saying you were away to Austria, and then a couple of days later. I thought,
Morning, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good, thank
Morning.
you. Good.
Morning.
Morning, Terry.
Yeah.
Morning, everyone.
Right. Morning,
Barry.
Morning. How are we all?
Very good. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, good here. Thanks, Ian. I'm good.
So yeah, oops.
Sorry. How are you, Kevin?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. Nice sunshine up here, as you can see.
Makes a change, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's shiny rain.
That would make sense, Kevin. It's rain Dreich in Glasgow, so it would be nice up in Aberdeen.
No, it's lovely in Glasgow. It's lovely up here. It's 90% blue sky.
It's always sunny in Bournemouth.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
That's the advertising bit, is it?
I used to always say that when I was in Bournemouth as well, Tim. Keep to the
Sorry.
script. Yeah.
Yes, very like to.
It's lovely down here.
Yeah. I remember I went to Bournemouth once and it rained.
Thanks. Great.
Believe it or not, one of my claims to fame, Robin, is being in Bournemouth when it snowed.
Really?
I spent about a year working in Bournemouth, and the winter I was there.
So kind of
I'm talking about for about 5
around,
minutes.
of course.
You know, let's not get carried away. It snowed for about 5 minutes.
Yeah. But you were only there for 5 minutes, Barry. So
Don't give the secret away, Kevin.
yeah.
Everybody else. Christian, how are you? How's the hotel going?
Good. Busy, I suppose busy in relative terms. Self-cation's flying. I think same everywhere, probably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good.
That's good to hear. That's good
It's
to hear.
quite off this week.
Yeah. Suppose with kids going back to school, I suppose it's you're relying now more on the older generation.
Yeah, tradition would have had we'll be kicking into big conference season.
Mm.
So we've had to go for, like you said, the silver generation and the couples.
Mm.
We've held out for 8. We've been pretty busy. We're putting a 2-night minimum stay, which worked better than we thought, which was positive.
Good. Excellent. Couple more minutes to go.
Sorry, everyone forgot putting the ears in.
Hi, Steve.
Morning.
Morning all.
Morning.
Just while everyone is joining, I was in Ireland last week, and my parents live in the Midlands of Ireland, so we decided to do a little hotel hopping. So I think we stayed at 4 hotels in 5 days, and one was 5-star in the centre of town, one was a 4-star in town, and a couple were over in the west of Ireland on the Mid-Atlantic Way, where they attract more tourists. And the thing that struck me, and it still sticks with me, is social distancing doesn't seem to exist in the dictionary over there, or the lexicon. There was 100% occupancy, kids running around, and the poor staff who were wearing masks doing their best to kind of make do, but there was no sense of any control over social distancing. So it'll be interesting to see if that has any repercussions. But all the hotels were packed, mega busy, easily 90% occupancy easily. It's so hard to get a room. So it's a good sign, I think, overall. And a lot of those people were staycationers. That was just my experience of the last few days. And the other thing that struck me, and it's a thing I'm going to be talking about later, was the amount of sheer food waste that I saw going back to the kitchen having been served to us. So that was something I thought was it was quite a helpful exercise to visit all these hotels and see what's going on from the customer point of view.
It's funny. I was in Austria. Austria had 700 people die from the COVID so far, which is quite a difference from the UK. Over there, they wear the masks when they feel like it in like the pharmacies and certain other areas and transport. But the whole the whole vision of it is totally different to what we're experiencing over here. It's quite amazing, really. Right, so where are we up to? We've got 29 people. I think we'll give it a start. We've had interesting couple of weeks. I got a survey from Stuart Broster from BDRC, and it was some interesting bits and pieces. Not very positive, but there's about 5 out of 6 adults were worried that there'd be a second wave. The people who thought recovery would take place in this year was at 18%. Was 80 odd percent in April, and now it's gone down to 18%. So confidence in the government is waning, which is not a surprise. There's so far the levels of occupancy, most people are saying it's still at sort of like similar to Q1 season.
It's not good to have a button now.
Just one second. Yep. And an interesting one, which I can actually probably vouch for a bit, is they say that people are quite cynical about the brands with their virtue signaling about how they're treating COVID. Now, as I was mentioning a minute ago to the people who were there, I went to Austria last Thursday, stayed overnight in one of a typical hotel at the side of the airport. on Wednesday evening, and they had the typical sticker on the door saying this has all been COVID cleaned, etc., etc., etc. But my wife, who's actually a housekeeper, head housekeeper, basically ripped them to shreds once she went into the room. We didn't say much about it to the hotel at the time, but you know, it's funny how all this publicity out and saying
website. So Robbie is the founder of the Gorgeous Group, which was founded in 1999, I believe.
Just a sec. We got mute. Yeah. So yeah, it was quite interesting to see just the difference between what they say they're doing and what they're actually doing. And I think a lot of the independents will be benefiting from that because they can be more honest with their clients and more dedicated to it. So another point that came up was business confidence is about 50% at the moment of things getting better soon, and a 43% think the worst is still to come. So slightly worrying times. But on a high note, I don't know how many people have benefited from the Eat Out to Help Out program. Show of hands, anybody who's actually had a meal out this last month? Yeah, benefited from it. Well, according to the statistics, over 64 million meals consumed, and on the days concerned, it's probably about 61% higher business than the last year. So it's certainly been an interesting time. Does anybody know of any companies that are carrying it on of their own accord into the future months, or doing it themselves?
There's a pizza chain in central Scotland, the DiMaggio's, that are doing it. They were on the news last night. They're doing it on their own accord.
Mm-hmm.
There are quite a few places in Bournemouth still going to do it. I don't know if you saw the BBC News. There is a gentleman from Zimbabwe, and he is carrying things on in October.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big thing on BBC News.
We've got the same. There's a chain of gastro pubs, I suppose. They're continuing on through October and November with this.
Do we think it's because of the drop in the VAT that people feel more confidence about offering that discount to get through the next couple of months? Anybody?
It's an interesting thought that, Robin, not one that had occurred to me. I get the impression, certainly those kind of across central Scotland that are talking about continuing the Eat Out to Help Out off their own P&L. I'd say it's very much just they're encouraged by the footfall they've seen on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they're seeing it as a useful marketing exercise. I think there's a sense of nervousness that if they don't continue the £10 discount, that they'll just see the footfall that they've enjoyed over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They'll just see it vanish. The VAT, kind of using the VAT drop to subsidise that's an interesting thought that hadn't occurred to me.
That's what occurred to me, that possibly it's given people a little more stimulus to put in discounts, although we'll see whether it's good or bad for the industry as a whole. Tourism, according to statistics, tourism is losing about £60 million a day in foreign tourists, or has done over the past couple of months, which is quite shocking, but probably explains why most of the big cities, especially London, is suffering so much from the situation at the moment. And funnily enough, there's been a 53% fall in hospitality insolvencies between May and July. Whether that's just holding it up until November, we'll wait and see. It's interesting. It's interesting statistic. It surprised me there've been so few, but we'll see what happens in the next part of the year. So also, Julie Tate sent me some information. There's a new business support program in Scotland only. I'm sorry about that for anybody who's in England and Wales and Ireland, but there's some kind of, I'll put the details in the summary as usual, but basically hotels that have more than 50 employees and a rate value of over 51,000, or possibly groups of hotels within an area that have more than 50 employees, may be able to benefit from further support from the Scottish Government. So
I can help you a little bit there,
Yeah.
Robin. There's two specific funds that have been launched by the Scottish Government. One directly targeted at larger hotel operations. So as you say, those with a rateable value 51k and above, you must have at least a minimum of 50 full-time employees on the payroll. There's quite complex qualification criteria there. And there's not a huge amount of money in the fund. So what Scottish Government's asking at the moment is that businesses that believe they qualify, that they express interest, and then there'll be a next round where you have to specify the kind of project, the investment that you want the support for. And it's not necessarily financial aid. It could be consultancy support. It could be Scottish Government paying for a training program or for an IT project that you want to implement within the business, which will help you to recover from the impact of lockdown and COVID. The other fund that's been launched by Scottish Government is specifically targeted at the events industry. That is a straight direct financial grant of £10,000. There's only 6 million available in the fund, so you can do the maths yourself. It's going to be very, very hit and miss. It'll very much for the events grant will be first come, first served. That's just a little bit more insight. You'll find details of all of those on the scotgov.uk website.
Thank you very much, Barry. Right, so moving on. First of all, today we've got Steve Bates giving us a presentation on procurement and how we can save those pennies on the back end once we've made the money on the sales. So Steve, I'm just going to hand you over as host. If you send it back afterwards, that way you can do anything. Okay.
Okay. First of all, can you hear me all right?
Perfectly.
Excellent. Our next question is sharing the screen. Where is my presentation on here? Here it is. Just go to presentation mode. Is that in presentation mode for you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so and you can read the slides fine, yeah?
Yeah.
Excellent. Good. So I just want to cover off, and good morning, everyone. I just want to cover off a couple of things in this presentation. First of all, I'll say a few words about myself. Then I'll talk about what procurement is, and then how it can help your business. And then finally, I've got some tips on how to get the best out of procurement. So a few words about me. I've worked in the corporate world for nearly 40 years, and I moved into become a business owner this time last year, actually, focused on procurement consultancy services. Now, in my corporate life, I did procurement for half of that time for a fairly large company called BT. And then the other half of the period, I was flipped over to the other side of the table, and I was doing bids and tenders for a number of companies I worked for, dealing with other organisations' procurement departments, including the wonderful public sector. And so that's kind of just my background. I just want to go into what procurement is and what does it do. And I have seen evidence from my time doing procurement, whether I've been doing it myself or bidding into other organisations, where the cartoon there is very much reality, where procurement is seen as a transactional activity without really any strategic approach. But there are, if you might already be aware of this, but procurement is founded on what's known as the 5 rights. So procurement is all about getting goods and services at the right quality, the right quantity, to the right place, at the right time, and at the right price. Now, there is a specific order to that. And in fact, you have to really start with the quality, because if you don't get the quality requirements right, then the rest of it is probably doomed to fail. So when it comes to quality, you have to define what your requirement is. What's the specification? What's the standard of what it is you want to buy, so that you can meet your own goals for your business. And it's also where you would define things like your ethical policy, whether you have specific requirements around environmental procedures or anti-modern slavery processes. You want to make sure that you're dealing with good quality suppliers. So that's where you would deal with quality, and I think that is the starting point. The rest of the order of the rights doesn't matter other than the last one, but I'll do them in this order here. So the right quantity, you might get a much better price if you buy lots of it. But of course, you end up having storage issues. You might have to tie up your working capital, and you might end up with waste as well, because you're not able to use all the goods that you've bought, and it just goes to waste, and you have to throw it out. But on the other hand, if you don't buy enough, then you might have issues with your being able to meet customer service. The right place is a subject all on its own within procurement. It's known as logistics, and it's all about getting products from point A to point B to point C, etc. And it also covers, where do you get your service, where do you get your supplies from? Is it somewhere a long way from the UK, and you've got quite a long supply chain, and you want to understand what the processes are from getting it from wherever it is made to you, and understanding the steps in between. So that's getting the goods to the right place. It's also important to make sure that you get the goods to the right time at the right time, because if you get them too early, then you've got holding costs. And if you get them too late, you can't meet customer service. And then deliberately at the end is price, because there is a common misconception that procurement is just about getting the lowest price and nothing else matters. And that is not true. So if you get all the other 4 rights in the correct for your business, then you're in a good position then to run a competition and get the right price. So that's the sort of basics of procurement. I just want to share with you some surveys, if I can move it forward. There we go. Yeah. So if you look at the left-hand side, and this sort of supports what I was just saying about, don't just focus on price alone, because if you do, at the expense of other things, you might have a load of extra costs or time that you use in managing the suppliers that you've contracted with. And of course, we all know that time is money. So, and you can see examples there of, price is a significant element of your total cost base, but there are other things that you need to do, like you've got to deal with suppliers, you've got to sort out problems of your suppliers. You might find that they're really poor at the accuracy of their invoices, and you've got to spend a load of time checking them. So it's important to stress the total cost of ownership rather than just the price when you are procuring goods and services. And on the right hand side is just some survey stats that have come from the likes of KPMG and Hoteliers. And the very first one is an important one that I will come back to later. You can do a great job at reducing your cost base if you really focus on it. But the problem is, once you stop focusing on it, 95% of those costs will come back. You can see that there is a poor record in the SME space that around the quality of the invoices, and quite often they will be wrong and will need to be checked to make sure that the billing is corrected. And you can see some other stats there about performance data, that only 31% of SMEs currently agree service levels with their suppliers in terms of the standard of service that they want. This is the quality point that I mentioned earlier. And only 31% of SMEs actually use competitive tendering. get the best out of their suppliers. Right, now I'm going to move on to how procurement can actually help your business. And here I have two scenarios, and I want to first of all say, and you've probably all heard this expression, that turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality. So this is the bit dealing with the sanity part and how procurement can help drive up your profitability. So in the left-hand side, you can see what I would regard as a growth example, where the turnover of a business is 3 million. These are all made up numbers. The turnover of a business is 3 million. It's making a 10% net profit. And then if you make cost savings of 20% on those costs, you can actually drive up your profit in this example to 28% from 10. And did you know that to achieve the same amount of profit just from your revenue, your top line, you would need to increase your revenue in this example to £8.4 million, which is a 280% increase in your top line. So which one do you think would be easier to achieve? 280% growth in your top line or a 20% reduction in your cost base? They have the same effect on your profitability. But of course, for some of us, we're not really in a growth scenario. Our top line is under pressure. We're in a recession, technical recession, and your revenues are falling. Your costs are likely to fall with your revenues. I've just used the 10% example again here. But again, with effective procurement and making a 20% saving on your procurement costs, you can still manage a successful business even in the face of declining revenues. And in this example, the net profit has gone up to 28%, as in the other example, but your actual net profit number at 756,000 has increased, despite the fact that your top line turnover has reduced by 10%. So that's how procurement can help your business with your profitability. But remember, cash is sanity. Ultimately, it's cash that you need to have in order to avoid becoming insolvent, and it's cash that also provides the money so that you can invest to grow your business. So, you know, procurement can very much help you. It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but procurement can definitely help your business to grow. And because you make profit doesn't mean that you're actually getting cash, because the cash is dependent on a number of factors, such as how do you collect your receivables from your clients? Do you collect them on time, or are you giving them extended credit? There's also the other angle, which is, you know, how quickly you're paying your suppliers. Now, obviously, when you pay your suppliers, looking at deferring that might be an issue. You've got to manage your supplier relationships very well to make sure you get the best out of that situation. There are other things you can do to improve the cash flow in your business through procurement. You can, if you need to make investments, and maybe you would normally buy capital equipment or capital assets in order to help your business to grow, you might want to consider leasing. There will be less strain on your cash reserves. And of course, you need to avoid having too much of your working capital tied up in excess stock. So so procurement, just to sum up this bit and how it can help your business, procurement can help drive up your profitability, and it can also help you drive up your cash flow. Right, so I'm going to move on to some tips now. And this is a bit of a dummy set of data around the cost base for a hotel, and you might think, what hotel has a cost base like that? Hopefully it is in the right ballpark. The very first thing you would need to do is rank your costs. The old 80-20 rule it certainly applies when you're looking at how can you get the best out of your procurement. And in this example, you can see that the top three items account for 80% of the spend, and you know, there's some fairly minor items at the end. So I would suggest your first thing is, if you're concerned about how much you're spending, is rank your costs and then focus on the ones that are of big ticket. As I said before, start with quality because everything else goes from that point. So, but don't over specify what it is you want to buy. You don't need the bells and whistles. If you can get by with just using standard quality products and services, maybe ISO standard, then go with that because the less you specify it, sorry, I shouldn't say it like that, the more you go with bells and whistles, the smaller the field is for getting the best suppliers out there to bid for your work. Also set out your ethics. If they're very strong within your company and you want to demonstrate that you're using suppliers that pay their staff well, treat them well, and have good environmental credentials, make sure that you specify that in your RFPs, your ITTs that you're sending out into the marketplace. I think it's also important to describe your KPIs. So what are the standards that you need your suppliers to meet in terms of if it was, for example, a telephone system that you needed to buy or an IT system, you want to know that the supplier will come out and fix things if you develop faults within a certain amount of time, or that if you're dealing with products and services that need to be delivered on time, that you've got some clauses in the contract that penalise suppliers if they deliver late. Etc. I mean, the KPIs are going to be your particular, whatever is relevant for your particular business. As I said before, with the 5 rights, I had price at the bottom because get all the other things right, and then you've got a set of requirements that you can go out to the market with and run competitive procurement processes and get the best deal from the suppliers in the knowledge that they will be meeting your requirements on paper at least. Watch out for contract end dates. This is an area where you can get caught out. So you might think you've done a really good deal for a 12-month, 24-month period. The contract comes to an end. The supplier might then be thinking, well, let's see, they just will roll over and go on to out of contract rates, which will inevitably be higher than in contract rates, or even worse, you then find that because you've rolled it over, you're now into a new fixed term period where you haven't been able to test the market. So it's important to watch out for those dates. Also, and this goes back to my leasing versus capital equipment comment earlier on, consider investing in new IT. It might help you, while it's an initial investment, but you can do it through cloud computing, cloud telephony these days. So you don't have the big outlay, and it might help you get reduced, it might get you increased efficiencies in the way that your business is run. And then, you might think procurement wouldn't cover these areas, but it certainly can. You might want to consider invoice financing, which will help you with cash flow. I'm not sure how relevant it is to the hotels business. You might consider capital tax allowances, where maybe you've upgraded your hotels in recent times, you've put new infrastructure in. Have you claimed your capital tax allowances, which is basically money from the government to encourage businesses to invest in new tech? And are you happy with the business rates that you pay? And could you look at maybe a review to see whether you can get a better rate? And ultimately, you have a contract with a supplier that you've awarded as a result of your competitive process. You need to make sure that they deliver to their contract terms. So don't just put the contract in the drawer and then pull it out when there's a problem. Make sure that you know what their obligations are, especially the ones in the early days, and that you're managing them to their obligations. So they're my tips. I've got one more slide, which is to do with processes. And I mentioned earlier on about the 95% of costs that come back as a result of you've made the savings, and maybe in the recession you've got rid of a lot of costs. But once you come out of recession or the lockdown's finished, how do you avoid those costs coming back into your cost base? This is the cost gate. So you need, I would suggest, a set of processes, procurement processes. And if you haven't got a procurement policy, I would suggest it would be good to have one, which then is briefed out to everyone in your team. And you have approval levels so that all costs that come back into your business are approved at the right level, that you consider automating that process, and you can buy on a subscription basis fairly cheaply these days purchase to pay systems that will manage that approval on your behalf. And then ask yourself, are those costs essential as part of that process? Can you keep them out? What costs in the last sort of 3 or 4 months have you done without, and that you just don't want those costs coming back? Ask yourself, what haven't we missed in the last 2 months? And maybe there are some things now, as a result of the sort of reduction of those costs over the last few months, that you might think, actually, we're working better in this area than we were previously. You know, let's just make sure those costs don't arrive back in our cost base in the future. So that's all I wanted to talk about. I mean, you notice here it's called step 1. If anyone wants to have a chat with me about steps 1 to 7, which is because this is part of a 7-step process, then I'm happy to have that chat in a separate session. Anyway, hopefully you found that useful. I will now hand back to Robin, if I know how to do.
If you, at the top of your screen, you can stop sharing.
Yeah, done that.
And then if you click on participants,
yeah,
at the right-hand side, there's a button next to me says more, and you can rename me as host. Thank you very much for that. Has anybody got any questions, Steve, about what he's been mentioning? No? I thought it was very interesting. There's a few points which always strike me as a financial controller, especially in the luxury market, is this whole idea of the quality of the product and the quality of the service. Sometimes you have to almost sort of like do that decision of whether you pay a little bit more for your quality of your product and your service, or you go for the cost saving. And that's the balance that a lot of hotels fall down on, either because they go too far to one side, or simply they're not constantly analyzing that balance to make sure that they carry on along the same lines. And all too often I've seen hotels where they've let the quality slide, and that's affected their sales, which has affected their profit. And it's a very tricky one. Another one there, which is good, is the ethics. But in the survey, I didn't actually mention it, but especially now after lockdown, there is a lot more interest for clients wanting ethically sourced products, possibly even British sourced products because of things that are on the horizon. But it's certainly an area which you can almost use as a sales point for your business, as opposed to just your personal views. But of course, an ethically sourced product may be more expensive than a non-ethically sourced product. So again, you have to weigh up how important to your business those things can be. The IT side of it's very important. If you have there's a lot of good, well, there's specifically one good procurement system out there which will allow you to analyze your food costs, and if you know how many potatoes you're buying a year, it gives you that power to go back to the supplier and push them for a better price. So often, even though you pay a little bit for an IT system, at the end of the day, it can save you a lot of money when you come to sit down with your suppliers and actually negotiate things. Another comment there, rates. In one client I worked with, because their revenue had dropped in previous years, we actually went back to the council, had a rates review, and actually had the value of the property reduced, which reduced their rateable value. So under present circumstances, that may be something worth talking to with with a rateable value consultant to see whether after what's happened this year, there is a way you can actually be reducing your rates for the coming year. And I think the most important is constant analysis. It's no good kicking into doing all the processes of getting your control on your costs and everything, only to then stop doing it, stop controlling it, and find it all comes back and to haunt you again. So some very good points there, Steve. Very good. And obviously, the biggest issue with especially food procurement and food costs is whether it gets to the plate of the client and whether that client actually consumes it. As I said, I was on my trip to Austria the other week. I stayed at this hotel by the airport, and we sat down. And to be honest, the waitress who sat us down said, they'll come and ask you what you want for breakfast. So I thought, yeah. They didn't. What happened was a waiter came out of a doorway with a tray for each of us full of a full English breakfast, croissant, yogurt, cereals, orange juice, and just put it on the table and dashed off again. Needless to say, I mean, I had the full English, but I left all the croissant, and all the rest of the bits around the plate. And my wife and my daughter ate the other bits and left the full English. Either way, if they were observing COVID precautions and throwing away those packaged goods, because at the end of the day, if somebody's touched them, you can't be sure they haven't already had COVID. So if they were doing that, then they'll be wasting. And even so, the English breakfasts that weren't being consumed straight out into the bin. So that leads me on nicely to
Robin,
Thomas. Sorry?
Robin, do you mind me just disturbing you briefly there? I'd just be interested to know if we have a view, for example, on the impact cost-wise of all these new hygiene protocols, additional supplies, for example, that hotels now need to stock up on. I don't know, Steve, if you have any metrics, for example, you can share with us in terms of cost impact. I mentioned a figure of 3% turnover in terms of additional costs there about, I think, 6 weeks ago at this stage, but that was just across a couple of hotels. And I'd be interested if, for example, there's a view out there that, you know, as we develop, thinking on this pandemic, whether or not, and the commercial impact, whether or not, for example, at some point we might see hotels charging an additional fee or supplement to cover the cost of, you know, for example, hand sanitizer, additional staff, etc. Is there a view there that one, that there is an established sort of cost impact, and two, whether or not there's a potential, let's say, or an appetite to charge customers a supplement? Anybody?
Are you still there, Steve?
I am, yeah. I haven't got the data, David. I mean, I would say that, you know, there are going to be some costs that will be increasing as a result of the pandemic. It's just the way it is. I mean, PPE, is PPE something that would be used in a hotel situation?
Well, for example, gloves, face masks.
Yeah. So those sorts of things probably increase because they're not things that maybe in the past were procured. So they will go into your cost base, be part of your P&L. And therefore, how do you maintain your profitability in that situation? Maybe there are some other costs that you've allowed to increase over time, haven't really spotted it, the contracts have rolled over, and now's the time to put some focus on it.
Well, it does certainly mean in terms of labour, you know, you have much more, let's say, effort going into cleaning rooms, preparing for staff, for guests rather, that you've obviously additional staffing hours, perhaps additional staff needed to cover additional cleaning shifts. This isn't necessarily generating any additional revenue. If anything, this is just allowing the hotel to operate. At some point, I think that we will probably reach a tipping point where there will need to be a conversation with the customer about whether or not they're prepared to pay a premium for perhaps enhanced levels of, and I take the point earlier on, Robin, about the fact that, you know, some brands are, you know, wearing these badges, you know, in terms of their hygiene protocols, etc. And the reality on the ground is that, you know, it's nothing more than a cosmetic exercise, and quite a cynical one at that. But whether or not, for example, clients, for example, would pay additional supplements for different levels of cleanliness, it'd be interesting to see how the conversation develops, because at some point somebody will realize that you should never waste a good crisis, and there's perhaps an opportunity here to impact on your ADR by charging a supplement.
Yeah, I've always broached the fact of whether people will. I mean, a lot of hotels now are taking away the amenities, the tea and coffee and everything, and whether people want to pay a little bit extra to get their proper sealed package of tea and coffee or shampoos or whatever, rather so they know they're getting a protected supply as opposed to something that's been left in the room there and people have been touching or not getting anything. As far as the staffing concerned, I think at the moment, a lot of hotels are benefiting from the policy that they shouldn't be cleaning while the guest is there, but they are cleaning heavily after the guest has gone, and cleaning the hotel and stuff. And it's kind of out counteracting. I think the danger is when things get back to normal, people will still expect the extra cleaning around public areas, etc., but they'll also go back to expecting the daily clean in the bedrooms. And I think that's where possibly there's a fear that the cost could go up as far as personnel is concerned.
Yeah, no, just say hi, Robert. Good morning. I didn't say hello before. But we are indeed cleaning the room here. I mean, my establishment, or even on a stay over, on a daily basis. We're a 4-star, and we are doing, and we can do it. Just to say,
a greater increase in how much increase is there in payroll? Have you been able to?
No, I don't have access to those information, but I mean, we are working on a very minimum stuff that it's more than enough considering the numbers. So
okay,
the proportion is actually higher than before, much higher than before. The proportion staff, customers, let's say.
Okay.
Morning, Robin.
Yep. Hi.
It's an interesting one, David. I think you'd be a brave man to do a Michael O'Leary and sort of charge for the cleaning standard, as you say. But going back to Robin's point, I think there's perhaps an opportunity as we move into a period where, forgive me, Francesco, but sort of cleaning during stay becomes more, should we say, reasonable. Perhaps charging for that. But I think, unless you can actually charge for additional amenities, i.e. physical amenities, I'm not sure you can actually charge for for having a good cleaning standard in the first place.
No. I wasn't saying that. I was saying that we are indeed cleaning the room during the stay over, of course. And no, of course, when a guest stay 2-3 nights, we clean the room every day.
I think you're quite unusual there, Francesco. I think most people are taking the view that that's perhaps, some would argue, more of an exposure for the staff. And that's the only point I would make. I'm not saying
I'm based in Ireland, and I mean, I know that most of you are in UK. Here in Ireland, since we are open, and I'm not the only hotel in Dublin, of course, doing that. Actually, as far as I know, most of the hotel in Dublin are cleaning room during the stay over. And then there is a special, of course, it's limited, but it was limited even before. When you clean a room as a stay over, you don't clean the room as a departure, of course. And when we do the room as a departure, we leave the room 24 hours before we first strip the room, and then we leave for 24 hours before cleaning and put on sale again. This is our system in my organization.
Christina,
Hi, everybody. Just to Francesco's point, Not all hotels in Ireland are actually doing housekeeping stay over cleaning. I think, Francesca, you're probably the only hotel in Dublin that's doing it at the moment. We run properties in the UK and in Ireland across the country. We're not doing it as part of the government guidelines which Fáilte Ireland and the Irish Hotels Federation sent out. We do offer clean linen to the guest, should they wish to have clean linen or clean bed linen, but it's up to the guest to change the bed linen themselves and pop it outside the door following the government guidelines. We did originally think about doing, to that point of actually doing like, you know, a COVID box at one stage, in particular for the UK properties where the guest could buy additional cleaning amenities. However, we actually spoke to a different company in Turkey who were doing the same, one of my former colleagues, and there wasn't an uptake on it. And as you can imagine, the UK and Irish guests would be very annoyed if they had to buy hand sanitizer and a mask and everything, to Tim's point, during the stay. I'm a revenue manager, so for me, it's a great way of driving additional revenue to the bottom line, but it does come with a cost of your reputation. And I think that's the one thing that people need to be very mindful of. We've had to absorb the cost, in particular in rooms that hotels that just function solely on rooms, which is unfortunate. But, you know, there is that, you have to take it on the chin. It's the only way. If we want people to feel safe in our property, we just need to take it on the chin and go ahead with it.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure the company which I don't know you, Christina, so I'm not sure which company you're talking about. I've just had a message. I will come back to you on that. On that, definitely. Thanks.
Okay. If we move on to more cost control, we've got Thomas to tell us a bit about food waste control, which is one that's always close to my heart.
So, just need to share my screen. There we go. Yeah. And bring this one up. Share. And hopefully.
Yep.
Right. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. Good morning, everyone. How are you? So food waste in hotels, own it, embrace it, reduce it. And really what I wanted to focus on was the earlier parts of that, the own it part and the embrace it part, because then if you do that, the reduce it part will just automatically follow. Just the reason that I suppose I'm here today is that I connected with Robin through the Institute of Hospitality, and we got talking, and I happened to ask the question about food waste, and it drove a very good debate about what was happening in various businesses. And the reason I asked the question is because I have a company called Kitchen Sink, and we are a sort of marketing funnel business, if you like, so websites and all things to help a company to drive their brand awareness and to basically try and grow their business through digital and marketing. And one of my only key, I launched the business in January, got a number of leads to grow that business, and of course lockdown came and everything goes on hold. But luckily, right at the beginning of the year, I had gone into a brand partnership with a company called Chef's Eye Tech, who are a food waste measurement technology business. And what's happened is I've basically worked with them very closely on developing their brand, because they have an amazing product, which I'll talk about briefly at the end, but I'm not here to just sell their service. I want to talk about food waste on the whole. But what it meant was, during that journey with them, I have kind of come to understand more about food waste and realized that there is so much you can do. And then just briefly, in terms of my own career, I've done 30 years in hospitality, and I've pretty much covered everything. So when I was 27 years of age, many years ago, I went to Kathmandu and opened a 300-seat restaurant, and then a second restaurant, and a third restaurant, and I even had a TV series out there. And then I came back to the UK and I had a pub, and then I went into contract catering, where I was the manager of a catering facility in one of the colleges in Oxford, Oxford University. And then from there, I went into social media for the company Baxter Story. I basically developed their social media strategy, a company that serves 400,000 people a day, or certainly pre-COVID, and looking after their whole brand online. And then an opportunity came up to join the London Clinic, which is the UK's largest privately owned hospital. And on the subject of procurement, I just want to share one tiny story, that just a funny thing that happened. we had a new finance business partner sit down with us in a meeting, and she was asking my housekeeper, when she looked at the numbers, she said, "What are you doing with the pillows? Are you eating the pillows? You just seem to be buying pillows every week." And Anne, bless her, who's been there for the last 12 years and is the most amazing woman I've ever met in terms of housekeeping, she said, "No," she said, "you need to talk to the surgeons." And she's, you know, this girl looked at her and said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, every time, of course, being a private hospital that deals with cancer and diabetes, there's a lot of amputations. So every time they have an amputation, they put 6 or 8 pillows under the limb in order to sort of make it more comfortable. And also it soaks up all the blood, and that ends up then in the waste and is thrown out. And of course, the budget for pillows sat on the housekeeping. And when you went to a surgeon and said, "You do realize how many pillows we're using in a year?" He said, "How much is a pillow?" "It's £5. How much do we charge for an operation?" "Maybe £15,000 or whatever." So to him, it didn't make sense. But to us, we were just buying these astronomical number of pillows. So that was one of the challenges you had on procurement within a hospital. Food waste was a very big issue in that hospital, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then I went on to work in a casino, heading up the operations in a luxury casino in Mayfair. And again, food waste was just astronomical in that environment. So with that in mind, I just wanted to bring up one photograph. And this was a photograph that I was trying to find one kind of nice, colorful image that I could use as a starting point for this this website that I was about to develop for this company. And to me, when I look at that, it's obvious that that piece of cake that's left over, maybe it's unsold or somebody couldn't finish it, and people would see that as food waste. And I remember going into a Tesco's, my Tesco cafe around the corner. I was getting a cup of coffee, and I just happened to say to the girl, you know, do you measure your food waste? And she said, "We don't have any food waste." It was like an unequivocal answer. She just said, "We don't have any food waste." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, no, we cook all the breakfast to order. Everything's cooked to order. So, you know, we don't have any food waste. And I looked around the table, all the tables, and there was half-eaten breakfasts all over the place. There was toast and butters and jams and half cups of coffee left and so on. And of course, what it really said to me was that there's a lot of food waste happening in a business that people don't actually recognize or realize. And one of them, of course, is plate waste. So for me, the cake that's left over is the overproduction. And then there's the hidden, once it leaves the kitchen, the chef thinks that's it, my job is done. But actually what's happening at the end of the main course has been cleared from a wedding, and you've got 180 plates being scraped into the bin, and maybe he's just put too much mash on the plate, and suddenly 30 grams times 150 is going in the bin. So that was a key learning for me, was understanding that food waste it can be a very hidden cost in your business, and recognizing that is key. So let's look at the overall picture. Food waste across the globe, 30% is lost or wasted. Now that includes food loss and food waste. If we look at food waste in terms of food produced only for humans, my understanding is that 46% of that is wasted, according to another survey. So on the globe, in global terms, it's a huge cost to the environment. What would that mean? Well, there are 800 million hungry people in the world, and if we just cut food waste by 20%, we could feed all of those people. And one very interesting statistic is that if food waste were a country, and you were to record all of the carbon emissions and add them up as a single country, it would be the 3rd largest country in the world. And just to put that into perspective, this was 2012, and you can see China, United States, food waste comes next, and that's bigger than Russian Federation and India. And if you think about India with 1.2 something billion people, the carbon emissions from India as a country isn't as big as the carbon emissions from food waste. So on a global perspective, it's a major problem. So let's have a look at what sort of steps we can take. And I think what I've sort of learned in my experience was the idea that you've got to make a start. And, you know, I know that right now, all the participants on this call, you all have your own businesses. And I suppose the question you have to ask yourself is, how active are you in looking at food waste as an entity in your business? And I think that what I found, no matter whether it was a very corporate environment or a very entrepreneurial environment, people are afraid of the subject, they're afraid of the topic. And I think what I'm trying to say in this presentation is that you have to make a start. And if you make a start and you take a real interest in it, I think that what you can do is you can bring everyone on board, and you'll find that collectively you can help to bring that down. That photograph, by the way, which I just found on the WRAP website, all the chefs are looking at a poster and it says, what can I put in the food waste bin? So I just thought I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes and talk about food waste bin. But it's good to see that the chefs are training. Now, let me have a look. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So with the best will in the world, you could say, we're going to, from tomorrow, start to record food waste. But at the end of the day, if the chefs don't buy into it, if the teams don't buy into it, if the kitchen porters don't buy into it, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to wear yourself out. So really what it's about is getting the team to work together on it. And for example, you might say, well, what's housekeeping got to do with it? Well, if there's breakfast being delivered to rooms, then housekeeping would be able to keep an eye on what sort of amounts of food waste are being left over, and what's not getting eaten, and so on. So again, you can, and also even at checkout, there could be a dialogue between the receptionist as they're leaving and say, and how was your stay? How were the portions, for example? And if the feedback generally came back, oh, the portions were all far too big, it was so generous, then that's an area that maybe efficiencies can be made. Or if they said there wasn't enough food, that's another conversation altogether. Now, the next thing then would be that you've got to figure out, it's like Google Maps, you've got to in order to figure out where you're going, you've got to figure out where you are right now. And one of the ways to do that is to carry out a food waste audit. Now, at the end of this presentation, what I'm going to do is I found last night, and it was through Unilever, I just happened to be doing a bit of research, and I discovered that they have a fantastic resource, and you have to enter an email address to be able to download it, but I've got the file. It's 8.5 megabytes, but in this file are all the posters, all the training materials, everything you need as a package to be able to begin the journey of doing a food waste audit and to take ownership over your food waste problem. One thing that struck me about it, because it is an amazing resource, and when you see the amount of work that they've done on it, it also is quite a scary entity, because you are going to be, there's so much to do, and you kind of go, oh, where am I going to fit this into my day? So what I would do is to say, measure it over 3 days, because if you just do a single day, you know, it could be, is business up or business down? And also on that day, maybe the chefs are doing their best not to have any wastage, and then before you know it, the next day on the third day is when you'll probably see more waste, because they're not as careful. Like I said earlier, involve every department, so everybody's involved and everybody feeds into the discussion. Delegating the task, I would say that rather than, if you're a hotel owner, you might feel, you know, obliged to kind of lead from the front, and I get that. I think what's important is, and this is something I wouldn't have done 10 years ago as an entrepreneur myself, but I've now learned through my experience that delegating the task sometimes can really give you some wins that you didn't expect. So you might have 2 or 3 people in the hotel in your business who are very keen, they want to do well, maybe they have a very keen interest in it, some young people who might be interested in the environment. So delegate the task, make them responsible, and reward them for the work. The other thing I would say, zero blame. I think that's important. I think rather, if you go into a kitchen and you say to the chef, we're going to start monitoring, you know, food waste, there's going to be a kind of a pushback on that. And what you really want to do is kind of say, look, it's not about blame, it's about understanding. Understanding where the food waste is, what's happening, how is it happening, and what can we do about it. To be curious about every single aspect of it, right across your whole business, and again, challenge assumptions. And the challenge assumptions is, we sat in hotel after hotel in Ireland, huge mountains of food coming out, and we would say to the waiter or the waitress as they were clearing, oh, your portions are so big. Oh yeah, here in Ireland you have to serve big portions, otherwise they won't come in. And I challenge that assumption. I wonder if there may be 1 or 2 agreeing with that, but I would say, well, you know, maybe you could reduce it by 20 grams and 20 grams until you start getting the complaints, and then you bring back that last 20 grams and you're there, you know. So that's what I would say about carry out an audit. That's an important point, to understand where you are today. And like I said, the file I'm going to share will have all the resources you need to do that. Then I would say lead with training. And what I've found with the training is that very often people don't even know the language. They don't know what they are, what it involves. So what's the difference between overproduction, trim waste, plate waste, and so on. So it's really about saying, look, even if one or two people in the kitchen feel they know a lot about it, let's start with the kitchen porter who doesn't know anything about it. Because if you bring the kitchen porter on board, they probably will recognize more food waste than anyone else in the building. So start from the very, very basics of the entity of food waste. Set the ground rules. I think that's an important point. One of the things that we did at the London Clinic was to implement we had guys there who'd been there 40 years, standing on one section, just doing the same dishes every day for as I said, for 40 years. So what we did, we designated one bin outside the chef's office as the food waste bin. That was it. That's the only bin you can put food waste into. The chef said, if I find any food waste in any other bin, then there'll be consequences. And then what it meant was the guys had to walk up to the chef's office, and by the window, they had to put it into the bin, and he could keep an eye on what was going on. One day he happened to be walking around the kitchen, and he found that somebody had taken, I think, something like 8 or 12 sirloin steaks or something, or fish or something that had gone off. And obviously they were very embarrassed about it, so they buried it in another bin, and he found it. He saw it there. And because we had made this policy in the kitchen of saying that that's the only, we then found out who had put the food into the wrong bin, and obviously they were trying to hide it and so on. And then we involved HR, and that person got a written warning. And you might say, well, that's very strong, but at the end of the day, it never happened again. And then suddenly you started to make real changes, because some people really respond to being encouragement, and other people just respond to maybe a little bit of discipline. So like I said, hold accountable. Each section has to be held accountable. Each department has to be held accountable. And the chef, as running his section, his department, has to be held accountable. And I guess you got to hold yourself accountable, because if you haven't been doing this in the past, you need to be sort of, having an honest conversation with yourself about what you're doing in your business. Again, be encouraging. So really, really celebrating the wins and getting people on board, rather than telling them off all the time for it. Because if you start telling them off about it, then they'll start hiding it from you, and then that's no good. One of the key things about setting targets is, in the audit, you might say, well, we've discovered that we waste X number of kilos in a day, and we have X number on average customers in a day. So now you have a metric of, let's say, I don't know, 400 grams or 300 grams per person. So once you kind of know that from your audit, you're able to then say, well, let's set a target of 250 grams per person. So finding the targets that you can set to your chef and your team, and then have them work to those targets. And if they meet those targets, then try and tighten them up and set leaner targets. Again, question assumptions. If the chef says, and I'm looking at the picture there of the chefs doing the prep, if the chef puts a strawberry on every dessert plate going out, even in the middle of winter, and then if you ask the kitchen porter to keep an eye on the plates coming back, just have a look at how many of those strawberries might come back and get thrown in the bin. I know that in 2 hotels we stayed in Ireland, they kept putting a strawberry on the champagne glass, which, it's just something we're not into. So that was a strawberry that was wasted. And I just wonder if you need to put a strawberry on a champagne glass, when the champagne has been able to hold up on its own flavor for the last number of 100 years. So again, anything that you see in your business, rather than sort of just looking at it at face value, drill down into the root cause. Why is that happening? And in order to understand how that food waste is happening. Changing mindsets. This is a really interesting one, and I'll come back to the food waste technology bit in a few minutes. But again, changing mindsets. So everything I've said so far is about trying to build a movement towards recognizing and accepting food waste as an entity and trying to reduce it. So leading by example is the first step in getting there. incentivizing ideas. So maybe have a little bit of a competition or something running on a monthly basis, and if anyone who has an idea for reducing waste, maybe they put a piece of paper into a box, and at the end of the month, whichever is the best idea, or the idea with the most effective cost-cutting idea, maybe they win I don't know, a bottle of Prosecco or something like that. And again, celebrate the wins. Any little area where somebody discovers a food waste happening, and it could be in another part of the hotel that was unexpected, and it could be around food waste in the staff canteen, for example. So it's about celebrating those wins and letting people feel really empowered that anything they can do to help reduce food waste is helping the business. And if there is a problem, if there is an issue, if somebody is being very negligent in how they're wasting food, or they don't care, or they're not tuned in, then I would say keep calm and correct. In other words, try and be supportive of them in trying to change their mind, but don't be afraid of tools such as disciplinary action if you need to use it. Of course, we all worry about those sort of things, but at the end of the day, if you set out your policies at the beginning, then and you're very clear about that, and you provide the training, and you get people. We even had our chefs at the London clinic sign a document that says they understand and agree to following the recipe, because the guys who cooked the staff food didn't follow recipes, and once they signed that, we were able to then use that document against them when they didn't subsequently follow a recipe in a disciplinary meeting. Listen to your team members. Again, like I said, there could be areas of food waste that are happening in your business, such as the staff canteen, so that could come to light. And again, listen to your customers. If lots of customers are saying that the portions are massive, then maybe it's time to look at that and challenge the chef and say, Chef, I think we need to just address this. And again, get involved. And the get involved is really about the idea that I was in a hotel just before we went to Ireland, and it was down in Farnborough, and it struck me, it was a small boutique hotel, and the owner was stuck in a spreadsheet looking at his wages on the front desk and didn't realize how much food waste was going on in the operation behind the scenes. So again, it's, you know, walk the floor and show an interest in it, rather than just looking at the numbers and trying to figure out from the spreadsheets. You need to demonstrate that you care by walking the floor. So looking at solutions, there are different solutions. Obviously, the file I'm going to share with you is all the collateral you'll need to do a food waste audit. One of them then would be, like I said earlier on, to put a food waste bin into your kitchen. And if you have that as the designated area where all food waste goes, then you're able to monitor the food waste that goes into that. And then if food waste is being thrown into other bins, then you can sort of, you know, be able to challenge people on why is that food waste being thrown into a bin away from the chef's office and not thrown into the food waste in the kitchen. And what I liked about that design was you can open it up and see what's in the bag itself, and you're able to sort of question what's in the bag. The problem, I guess, I have with the manual system is that you're only limited to what you see and what you inspect at any given point in time. You can't really get an overview. And with that in mind, over the last few years, there have been a number of solutions that have come along. Now, as I said, full disclosure, I work with a company called Chef's Eye Tech, but actually, if I was owning a hotel right now and I looked at all three, knowing what I know, I think I would still want to work with Chef's Eye Tech. But that said, let me give you a quick overview. So there are three key players in the food waste measurement space. Number one is LeanPath, number two, Winnow, number three, Chef's Eye Tech. LeanPath was the first to market about 15 years ago. It's an American-based company, and they developed a piece of technology, and it was a sort of very clunky, but at least it got the job done, and it started the idea in how it can be done using technology. What then happened was, interestingly, a guy called Mark Zorn was brought on board at LeanPath. He was a management consultant for KPMG, I believe. He then came on board to see how he could help the company to grow and so on, and get further funding. But when he looked at the business, he was very impressed with it, saw the opportunity, and he went away and opened his own business using a similar kind of idea of the food waste technology, and that's where Winnow came along. And then Chef's Eye Tech, just to kind of put the final point on that, Ronnie Truss is a guy who some of you may have heard of, a company in London back in the 80s and 90s, Cutty's Seafood. He was one of the co-founders and directors of that. He also opened a bank restaurant and fish restaurant, the chain of restaurants. And it was in one of his restaurants, I think it was a Japanese or I think it was a Japanese kind of buffet type restaurant. And he had a very big problem with food waste. He asked his son, Dan, to go in and have a look. His son, Dan, phoned him back an hour later and said, yeah, listen, it's all just going in the bin. They're just overproducing and it's all going in the bin. So they looked at, he said, well, let's look at what solutions we have. So they looked at Lean Path, they brought it in, they trialed it, but they found it very clunky to use. So they then set about developing their own technology. So that's how those three are kind of interlinked. So let's look at Lean Path. And by the way, I haven't gone into depth on all of these per se. I would say you need to do your own due diligence on each of these. But just to give you an idea, there you go. So you've got your weighing scale over at the top there. At the top of that is a camera to take a photograph, and then you can see that sends the information to a tablet position next to it, and you can then enter whatever details you need to, and then that would then send the information to a dashboard which can be logged in and viewed at remotely from another office, the chef's office, or the hotel general manager's office, or in fact, you know, on a more global level, it can be the regional managing director's office if he wants to look at 50 sites. So that's the basic premise of how it works. If we then look at Winnow just briefly, so Winnow started out, and this was the system I originally saw about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, where you came over towards the bin. As soon as you put your foot on the pedal of the bin, the tablet would come to life. You would then scrape the food into the bin, and it would obviously know the difference between the weight now and the new weight, and then you would enter what the special was. And that was the general premise of what it was. But what they then did about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, was they developed an AI technology. And the AI technology, so I'm going to bring up an image from, sorry, here you go. So that's the newly developed bin, and you can see that now that the tablet is actually connected to the wall. It's actually positioned, screwed onto the wall, so the bin is not, you can't move the bin around. And then there's a camera underneath there, and the image I wanted to bring up was, you can see there that what it does is it takes a photograph of the food as it goes in, and it then tries to work out through the algorithm of what that food is. So the idea behind that would be that it reduces the chef's time in inputting what the items are and so on. The feedback that we've got on that from clients who used it and are now coming over towards Chef's Eye Tech is that, for example, if you look at that image of the cucumber, well, is that cucumber or is that courgette? And that very often the system is not able to differentiate. Or if you were throwing out, let's say, 4 or 5 portions in a tray of cottage pie, well, it doesn't know whether it's cottage pie or whether it's shepherd's pie, so you still have to input certain things. And in the end, the technology, while it sounds good in terms of the brochure, there's still a lot of learning for it to do. So I think it's just a little bit ahead of its time. Saying that, they're very well established, they're globally recognized, and they're worth having a conversation with, if anything, just to look at it, because if it's shiny and new, you just might get the chefs to buy into it. Then we come to Chef's Eye Tech, and basically the way Chef's Eye Tech works exactly the same. So you can see there the chef is weighing the tray. He's got a tray of pineapple skins on the weighing scale, and the actual unit, the flat screen, sits directly over it. He then puts into that what the service is. So let's say breakfast or lunch. He will then put in his name. So it's recorded that John, for example, will be putting this in at breakfast time. Then it will take a photograph, but you can also put in the tray that he's using. So right now he's using a gastronome tray. You just hit the tray, and then it'll automatically recognize that the tray weight is reduced, and you get the net weight of the ingredients. It then sends that information to the dashboard, which you can see there on the middle, and then the dashboard, you can drill down into every aspect of the data. And then the third element, and it's a key element to to the success of Chefs I Take is the engagement with clients and customers. So they will be on site, work with chefs to for example, install the system, put it there. And what we've learned is just get them to use it. Doesn't matter about what it costs or how much it's going to save you. Just start using it. And as chefs go to throw something in the bin, you have to kind of have somebody standing there and remind them to come over and record that food waste. Once they get used to the system, I think we got it down to 12 seconds for a transaction, and by the way, we've worked out that the average cost for a kilo of food waste is about £1.70 to £2, depending on the type of operation. So automatically we know that if there's 50 kilos of food waste in a day, then that's £100 is your net cost of that food waste. But once the data starts to come in, what we found in various businesses, the chefs themselves start to get more curious about, well, what if we were to put in the recipe so that we know that of that 100 kilos, 10 kilos was meat and 50 kilos was carbohydrates, and so on and so forth. And then what they've also in certain businesses done is put in costings against those recipes, so now they can drill down almost to the penny for what they're doing. But it starts with just engaging them and using it on a daily basis. So that's, and by the way, we put that into the Hilton Metropole, Russell M Piazza. It's the largest Hilton in London, I think 1,200 bedrooms. I came back 6 weeks later and I said, Russell, what was the biggest difference you saw? And he said, it was the change in mindset. He said, now the chefs have this conversation around food waste that they never had before. So I think that was very interesting to me, that it wasn't just about reducing cost, but it was actually about awareness and kind of changing mindsets. So I just want to show you, these are real photographs from sites. These were taken from sites in Dubai, so that's why you might look at them and wonder what they are. But I'm going to show you just literally 9 photographs of food, photographed, raw, nothing changed, literally just the food itself. And all I want you to do is just think about the idea that right now you would find it maybe a little bit difficult to walk into a kitchen and look into a chef's bin, because then that could, how would he feel about that? But imagine if you every day could see, so that's tomato trimmings, for example, you could see these photographs on the dashboard, and then there you go. So what happened to those croissants, for example? And then we got some yogurt pots that came back. And I know that systems are changing and services are changing, but nevertheless, if that was going on in a business, you can ask the question. There's a rice dish, for example. Is there something that could have been done with that? And again, just some trimmings. And the trimmings there is everything from carrot and melon and so on. So I'm just curious to know why was that plate thrown out? So for me, what's interesting about the difference between Winnow, which takes a photograph of the food once it's in the bin, and the Chef's Eye system takes a photograph before it went in the bin, is that when you have the dialogue or the conversation with the person who was dealing with that specific food waste, you can ask them the question, why did you throw that in the bin? Whereas if it's already been in the bin, well, you can shrug your shoulders and say, all right, chef, sorry, I won't let it happen again. So I just wanted to share with you that the photographs can also be a very, very powerful tool in training and changing mindsets. So finally, all I would say is that I was going to write a long list of things you can do in your business to reduce food waste, but I thought it was more important for you to kind of feel a sense of empowerment, that maybe it's more about embracing it, it's more about getting the team involved, it's more about taking ownership over it. And then once you start to do that, there are tools out there, once you do a couple of Google searches on doing it manually, or there is technology that you can use as well. So just quickly here, tips to reduce your food waste: build awareness of food waste into your staff training. Plan Monday's menu against the Sunday roast surplus items. They're all things that you already know, so I don't need to go through all of those things, to be fair. And that's pretty much it. That's a little bit about food waste from me.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Does anybody have any questions for Thomas? I know we've run a bit over time, but I think everybody's been very interested in it because we've not lost many people.
Wow.
Any questions?
Not really, not really a question, but just a point to be made. Just an extra point. Now you're talking about food waste and everything, and you mentioned about having the recipes so the chefs can actually follow the recipes correctly. And restaurants or hotels, anyone that deals with food, they should get these recipes organized and structured. What in reality doesn't happen that often. So chefs are left to make the dishes as they think it is to be made. So I think that that would be a very good point to add as well. And it's all data at the end of the day. If you know what's the recipe like, the chef's gonna be able to make a better ordering as well. That's another part of a amount of food waste that you find going through a freezer or fridge or a stock room. A lot of food being spoiled, and as Thomas said, a lot of things go inside the bin. They get buried and no one sees it.
That's right.
So yeah, just a point. Very important.
I think challenging the chef to get the recipes done is one of your biggest barriers to success. However, saying that, if you take small steps, so for example, there might be a special every day. So we know that the chef will usually have a bank of about 12 dishes that he'll kind of tend to go to, as you know, he'll do the shepherd's pie and the Sunday roast. Well, if you start with those 12 recipes or those 10 recipes, every plate might have a mashed potato and a side order. So do those 5 or 6. Every dessert has a recipe in order to make the dessert. So those are quite straightforward. And I think before you know it, if you get the team involved, you can have a bank of 25, 30 recipes to plug in, which would be, as coming back to Steve's point about the 80-20, 25 or 30 recipes in your business might carry 60% of your sales in terms of food, the menu items, you know. So I would say that it's very easy to get caught up in the idea, oh my God, we have 80 items on our menu and we have all these different connotations. Where do we start? Well, actually, guess what? On a night, when you look at it, you've sold 15 of those, you sold 18 of those, and if you rank them in terms of sales, you'll go, well, why don't we record these 5 recipes and at least start with that? And once you've got a cottage pie, that's already a shepherd's pie, just a matter of adjusting the price on the meat. So it's a very important point. Coming back to the London clinic, the reason why recipes, there was 2 reasons why recipes was very important. Obviously, when you're cooking for patients in a hospital, then the recipe is critical, because you need to have, you need to identify ingredients that they can't have, and so on and so forth. So what was happening was the chefs were working to very specific recipes for the patients, but when it came to the staff food, which was 1,200 staff, so the canteen would serve 600 people every lunchtime, and they were making 5, 6 trays of lasagna without a recipe. And one day it's over seasoned, another day it's under seasoned, and another day it's very runny, and another day it's very dry. So we got them to serve, to work to a recipe. But what then started to happen was 2 things. One was that they used to make a special for the patients and a special for the staff. But what happened was, once they started to follow the recipe, now that we had a recipe for the lasagna, we could actually put that on as the special for the patients. So now we didn't have to have 2 different specials. And secondly, and this was the biggest finding, was once we improved the quality of the food for the canteen, the nurses themselves would be presenting the menu to the patient in the room and telling them how fabulous the food was in the hospital, because their food in the canteen had improved. And then suddenly it primes the patients to want to choose the dishes. And the number of times I've been in a hotel recently where the waitress or the waiter has said to me, oh, you've got to try that dish. I've had that and it's amazing. So that's what I would say. Getting those recipes down, it's a lot of work to begin with, but it's critical, especially now post-lockdown, in controlling your costs.
I think that's a, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me or not. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, sorry. Really good presentations from Steve and Thomas. Very interesting. One thing I would probably note about this, especially on Thomas's presentation, a lot of the systems that we're talking about, software systems and hardware, etc., great for your larger hotels, your bigger businesses. One of the things that we find with smaller hotels, restaurants, etc., is that part of the problem is it starts really with the chefs, with the people accepting orders. So many different, you know, it's down to individuals actually doing their part when they're accepting orders. So go back to basics, take the software out of these things. It really does come down to making sure your staff are checking off orders when they get them, making sure that the ingredients they're receiving are fresh, and all those kinds of things. And that really comes from the top and the management. So with all the systems in the world that you can have, and some of them can be quite expensive as well, it really does come down to the basics of still making sure and training the staff. I think that's probably the most economical way of getting the best out of your food and maintaining your GPs.
You're right, Andy.
Andy, I'd agree with everything you just said there, and I think what it really highlights is, I mean, I see an awful lot with the small independent hotels that I do work with. The owners, the senior team are so much working in the business on a day-to-day basis that they simply don't have the time and the headspace to work on the business. And the reality is that bit of time spent on monitoring purchasing, monitoring the goods received, managing the cost control systems, managing the revenue systems will actually pay off far greater than employing 1 or 2 extra people on the floor to look after your direct customers. So completely endorse everything you said.
Yeah, I mean, look, we find ourselves banging our head against a brick wall so many times when, you know, we're doing the one of the services that we offer is outsourcing of bookkeeping and accounts, and we go through, and every month we present them their management accounts. And we say, look, your GP's low on your food, blah blah blah. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? Every 3 months we'll go to site, we'll visit them, we'll go through the kitchens. Okay, are the staff checking this off? Are they doing it? And it's the managers themselves or the owners themselves really cannot see the value in making their staff do the job that they're paid to do. Yeah. And you know, we really are banging our head against a brick wall. We're trying to save these people money, you know, and you know, it seems to be we're pushing treacle uphill all the time with this very subject.
I think it's a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? It's a lot of the time. Say you say about systems. I think I always make sure a hotel has as many systems as possible, cheap as possible. Not because they solve the world, but because they put into play the processes. So if they're trained well on using the system, they start to adopt the processes, and that gives the managers the information they need to actually see where the problems are and draw their attention to it, so they can actually go back to the front line and concentrate on those areas. So it's like, yeah, if you have to have the idea behind it, but sometimes putting the system in will make them realize where the problems are, and that's what actually brings them back into the operation to actually control those things. So yeah, but it's no good just putting a system in if you don't withhold the policies and withhold the procedures that system's there for, or otherwise, yeah, it's just a useless piece of technology that makes more work for somebody. So it's a case of putting the systems in and making sure that people understand what the processes are, why it's there, and making sure the managers actually look at those systems and realize where their problems are.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So many times we've put systems in, we've got various systems that we recommend and use. And within a few months, we're taking them straight back out again, because the owners will not promote these systems to do a job. So you're on a hiding to nothing really.
What we found, sorry, with the subject on chef side tech, it's an interesting point that you make, and I fully get it about the working in the business and working on the business. So what we found is that when a business owner or the decision maker at a senior level in a bigger company would bring chef's eye in, there's very often a kind of a sense of suspicion by the chef. So we work very closely with the chef. But what happens with the chef is he's being nailed every single month on his food cost. And once we start to show him that this is the tool he needs to help him with his food cost and that we're actually on his side and it's not a big stick to beat him over the head with in terms of waste, he then starts to buy into it and use it. And that chef's eye tech will then send a report. So if the owner is really busy, then Chef's Eye Tech would work with that business owner to say, what metrics do you want to see? And they might say, well, I just want to see X, Y, and Z. And then they would get a report every week or every month, depending on what they want, which just shows them that. And one final point I would say is that, again, the idea that you can then open a dashboard when you're sitting at home on a Saturday morning, before you head into the hotel and check on things, and you can open up and you can say, okay, let me just go through and see what was thrown in the bin last night. Let me just go through and see who was recording food waste. You can track every single person and say, oh, 3 chefs in the kitchen recorded 10 items and 1 chef only recorded 1. So we've got a problem with, young, whatever his name is, in the kitchen. I need to have a word with the chef to talk about that. And all I'm saying is that you're absolutely correct, but the training will only go so far if you're not following it up with monitoring and keeping an eye and holding people to account and putting that training in place. In practice, I mean.
Yeah.
I think that there are 3 things that cause food waste. First one is the quality of the product that you're purchasing. Second thing is it's not properly cooked. And the third thing is there is too much on the plate in the first place.
Fully agree.
Okay. I think we need to round it up. Thomas, can you pass me back the host, please?
Yes.
Will you log off, because I need to save the chat.
Where is
up? If you go to participants down at the bottom.
Yeah.
Then at the side of my name, you can click on more and
got it.
Host.
Make host and save. Yeah. There we go.
There we go. Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. As usual, I'll be sending out the summary with details of what Thomas has been talking about and all the other bits and pieces we've covered here. Next session will be on the 15th in 14 days' time. Hope to see you all there, and hope business goes well for you all in the next couple of weeks.
Finger crossed.
Right.
Thanks, Robin.
Bye, Robin. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Speak to you later, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Robin.
There we go.
Hi, Thomas. Can you send me the presentation and that about Unilever?
Yeah, I'll do that. I wanted to share the waste management tool. It's an 8.5 megabyte folder, but it wouldn't accept the folder. It only accepts a single file. So I need to,
You send me some way I can pop it into the summary, and then people can drag it down themselves. And then I'll send you a list of everybody the information's gone out to. So
brilliant. Thank you very much.
You'll know. So probably about 70 odd people who actually receive the summary.
Right. Fantastic.
I'm connected, but I usually include people who are interested. So
brilliant. Thank you very much. Top stuff.
Brilliant. And you. Thank you. Kevin, how are you?
I'm good. No, that was good. 2 good presentations. It's a lot to take in. Food waste, everybody's got their own way of doing it, but it's a lot to take in. And he's right. I think before I would have gone to a format where you're buying a product, I think the training part of it is good. Certainly the last place I ran, we were doing an astonishing amount of meals, but all the recipes were recipes that we didn't vary from them. And they wouldn't let each other vary from them, so everything. And that's what we built our reputation on, was consistency. But we gave them far too much. And that was the original owner had that as a philosophy, so we never really moved from it.
Yeah.
And, but we gave them an awful lot of food, that's for sure.
I suppose there's ways of giving quantity.
Yeah, listen,
people. So some people, you know, it's sort of like, you know, there's different ways of serving it so that you can actually, if somebody really...
Well, I tell you, my philosophy since, I mean, my kind of mentor was the guy that started the hotel, but what I used to do was I never, ever, ever asked anybody if they enjoyed their meal. Never. I always said, have you got enough to eat? And then they would tell me how much they enjoyed it. And if they needed more to eat, well, potatoes and veg are relatively cheap. They're not getting any more steak. I can give them some more chips or a bit of salad or whatever. But very rarely I ever had to do it. You know, it's just, everybody says, yes, it's great. But it's the question you asked, have you got enough to eat? And people would tell you how good the food was.
Yeah.
Because if you say you're enjoying your meal, everybody says, yeah. And even if they're sitting there with a knife and fork there with a 3/4 of a meal not eaten, they always say, oh yeah, it's good. Oh, I'm not feeling very well, or whatever stupid thing. And then they'll write a review about you later on. No, very good. Thanks, Robin.